So when it comes to bots, bots to me are just one delivery mechanism or one channel by which you can interact with candidates. So this is like something that pops up on your jobs page, or something that maybe is delivered in other places on the web, and it will ask candidates questions, answer their questions. What we're really finding is, and where we try and provide value, is that bots are one way to deliver the content, but we want to be wherever candidates are engaging. So that includes, text messaging. That includes a bunch of other forms. And what we're finding is there's a lot of research around whether candidates want to talk to a bot or not. So there was an article by VentureBeat that said, or maybe I think it was VentureBeat that said about 60% of people would talk to a bot if they felt it would get them answers quicker. And I think most people would say if answers come quicker, that they would talk to a piece of technology. But there's really been a trust issue, because I think in the past there's been mistakes made in how technology is used, and really bridging that gap between technologies and humans.
Yeah, I'm smiling about this because I was thinking about, in relating to my own life, my wife loves talking to her gadgets. So
Yeah.
she's got them all. She has Siri, Alexa, Google. She loves talking to all of them. So you think there's a correlation in that research? Is it the same kind of thing, that the people who are into that kind of thing are more likely to be okay with or enjoy working with the bots?
Yeah, it's a good question. So generally, I would say like a couple years ago was mainly folks that were kind of adept to those type of technologies, like your wife or like myself. I fit in that same category. But what we're finding is people are getting more and more comfortable, particularly, in some scenarios like support. It's a little harder because conversations can be very open-ended, and all of a sudden you're asking a question and the bot just keeps repeating itself. In candidate screening, consistency is good. So you want to be asking each candidate the same set of questions. So I think it's easier to have more high-quality conversations there. So if you can get to a certain quality level, we have found that most people actually, not just the ones that are maybe more savvy, are happy to have that interaction. And really, it's not about replacing the person, but getting them to the right person quicker. So if we can prove out that, hey, you're a top candidate, you want to get to the next step in the process, here's a quicker way to do that versus, again, throwing your resume over the fence.
Mm-hmm. Is there a component to this that is, I'm thinking from a legal standpoint, it occurred to me as you were talking about the consistency in questions, that it maybe improves the lack of bias or discrimination, or how does it relate to bias or discrimination? Let me just ask it simply that way. Yeah.
So really good question. So there's a lot of legal stuff, and then there's a lot of maybe not legal, but more ethical stuff. So one thing that's really prevalent right now when entry-level recruiters that maybe had not a ton of training are interfacing with candidates, as well as when people are doing reference checks, it's very common for them to ask questions around, protected class status and things that are actually illegal to ask people about, sexual orientation, things like that. So what we find is there's a lot of that stuff happening right now. And the good thing about technology and bots is you can make it consistent, and you can make it so that those never come up.
Right.
From like a bias standpoint, so I think one piece is just creating a level playing field and being accessible everywhere. There's some people that I think are getting this wrong. So there's AI that's being used in video interviewing, and so basically saying that, hey, this candidate's better than that candidate based on an algorithm that's used on, like you and I are talking on video here. We did a lot of interviews, and we found that, folks with autism or folks that are blind, we talked to a particular guy who's blind, and he just can't apply to jobs that strictly use that video, the AI to discern whether they hire someone based on the video, because he can't control his hand gestures as much, and his obviously being blind, he's not making eye contact, and some technologies are using things like eye contact and stuff like that to say, hey, this candidate's better than that, and there's a lot of great technologies that are doing video. So I'm not saying it's always bad to use AI in video interviewing, but But yeah, there is a lot of bias at play. So I think it starts with it being accessible. And some of it's even just the words that are used. Some candidates will, if they're being asked a set of questions that maybe offend them, they're less likely to proceed in the process. There was a ZipRecruiter study that about around 70% of job descriptions in the U.S. use male gendered words. And if they just made it neutral, you get about 45% or so more applicants applying. So lots of things in the wording. The words do matter. And then just in the accessibility of it all.
That when you talk about some people using the AI technology with video and trying to read body language, it reminds me of, I don't know if you've read a recent book by Malcolm Gladwell, which was Talking to Strangers. And
I've heard that, yeah.
Yeah, and he basically discusses this exact issue about that actually as human beings we're terrible about how we read body language and the assumptions that we make based on it, and how it goes wrong more often than not in terms of we think we know things about people by just listening to the way they say things and looking at their body language, and we often can really misinterpret and lead to some disastrous situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to get that on my reading list, that Malcolm Gladwell book. But yeah, they say a lot of communication happens outside of what you're saying with body language and whatnot. But if you interpret those wrong, and sometimes if you're having machines try and interpret that, it could get even worse, perhaps. But
yeah, I wish I could remember. He had some terminologies for it, but that some people don't have a match between how their body language and what they're actually thinking or saying is. And so, yeah, interesting book. I would totally recommend it for as it relates to this particular field. Yeah, that's great.